with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, last week we had a conversation and we really got deep into Biden's tax policy, or what he's proposing. And he's proposing, trillions of dollars of spending. I mean, big government like we've never seen before.
Mm-hmm. Over $6 trillion.
Certainly in my lifetime, in the history of our country, I would suggest. And so you got the corporate tax rate. They're saying it's at 21%. We're going to raise it to whatever he's going to raise it to. He's got to pay for trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't think he could raise taxes enough. If everybody paid, everything they made in taxes, I doubt that would be enough. And so there you got on the corporate tax side, and then you got the capital gains tax. And this one is particularly troublesome because so many Americans benefit from their investments. I mean, that's their retirement, man. That's their 401k. That's what they work their whole lives for in order to enjoy. And now he wants to take it to 20%, from 20 to 40%. I mean, it's just going to absolutely destroy reinvestment in America. And it's just fundamentally changed capitalism in America, entrepreneurialism in America, small business ownership in America. It's terrible, 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 Rich.
You just defined exactly the mission of the Biden administration and the lefties on the left and the Democratic Party and exactly where they're going. And the point is that that's exactly what they want to do. Don't you remember what Obama said and his wife said? And now we're going to go out and fundamentally transform America. They have not given up on that mission.
A redistribution of wealth. I guess that was
massive. But there's something else that you left out. That's very frightening. And this is what upset Stuart Varney. I was watching it. We had Grover Norquist on our show right after he was on Stuart Varney that morning. And that is the step up, the base step up, that when you inherit something from your family, from somebody, such as a farm, that's what they were using, land, real estate, you have to be taxed. You are taxed on the current value from what it was when they started on their base, and you have to come up with that money right away. And that's not a good thing.
Which most Americans can't.
Can't do. So what are you really doing?
So you're selling your legacy, your heirloom,
right?
To pay taxes,
right? And I feel like I'm in a Bill Murray movie. And what do you think happens then? You're eliminating the whole concept of the family farm. The family farm can't exist like that because on paper they look like they're worth, millions upon millions of dollars because of the land and things like that. But the truth of the matter is they don't make that money out of that land. They're hardworking people. They make a living out of it. So if you take away that base for them, you're eliminating the ability for them to maintain that legacy. And they have to give it up. So who buys it? Think for a minute. Who buys it?
Corporate farms.
That's right, corporate people. So it's an aggregation of power and
Bill
wealth.
Gates. Good news for Bill Gates.
Well,
he's like amassed so much farmland.
He's the guy he's the poster boy right now for prenup. That's all I got to say.
Well, I guess
I don't feel sorry for him. He's got a lot of money.
I guess his land holdings just went down a bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's talk about Biden's trade policy. We talked a lot about trade during the Obama administration, and he came in as very much an anti-free trade guy. But towards the end of his administration, he was actually promoting the European trade agreement, the Asia Pacific trade agreement, and of course none of those got over the finish line. But I mean, he changed his tune, significantly changed his tune. So what is the tune of Biden? And it's hard for him because, hey, look, Trump has changed things on the Republican side to be, very much pro blue collar, pro American manufacturing, And
well, he's redefined the Republican Party
from that point of view.
It's a big flip.
So is there much difference right now between Democrats and Republicans on America's trade policy? Let's bring in Dan Pearson. He's a trade policy fellow at Americans for Prosperity. Dan, welcome to Made in America.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about, I mean, Trump really threw trade policy, I mean, at least traditional Republican trade policy on its head. I mean, it was like a very different thing. And Republicans have traditionally been free traders. Democrats, for the most part, have gone along with it, except during election time. Then all trade agreements are bad, and they go very heavy deep into the union position, and then they come out of that, and typically American members of Congress would vote for trade agreements when they came up. I mean, that time was when that was America's position on trade agreements. Many of them got passed. In the latter years, though, that hasn't been the case. There's not even trade agreements right now before that's being considered. I don't believe. So, what can you tell us about Biden's trade policy, and how does that differ from Trump's trade policy?
Well, Biden did inherit rather a mess from the previous administration. You know, the Trump team left us with tariffs on imported aluminum and steel under Section 232, tariffs on more than $300 billion of imports from China, most of which are needed as industrial inputs in this country to keep our factories running. So it's not a happy situation that Biden stepped into. So far, unfortunately, he's only making it worse. One might have hoped he would have done better, because there's low-hanging fruit out there from an economic standpoint. We can, of our own decision, revoke the 232 tariffs, for instance, which should be pretty simple because most of them apply to our allies. Okay, that's the steel and aluminum stuff. China is not affected much by that. We import. Let's see, last time I looked, China was not even one of the top 10 countries providing steel to the United States. Okay, and the China tariffs themselves, the 301 tariffs, my view is we should revoke them because of how much they hurt America. So we wouldn't get rid of them to do a favor for China. We would get rid of them to do a favor for ourselves and our businesses that depend on those products.
Well, all right. So I want to go back for a second, and I want to kind of revisit a bit with the Obama administration, I should say the Obama-Biden administration. That's the relevance to this whole thing, because it sort of seems like we're in this resurrection right now, and it's sort of to me, to a degree, that we're looking at Obama 3.0. And in the Obama administration, we watched very carefully how that administration had winners and losers. Didn't they, Neil? They picked winners and losers. It was sort of like a central planning, and the administration decided who would get and who wouldn't get.
Like solar panels.
Exactly, like solar panels, Solyndra being the poster child for that one. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't really end up really well. I mean, most of them failed. Well, a lot of money went out the window. We're not quite sure where all the money went. We certainly didn't get value out of that. So are we kind of going down that same road of central planning and picking winners and losers, and maybe not being as successful as it could be?
Oh, we certainly seem to be, because the Biden administration so far has further tightened imports on steel and aluminum by increasing the Buy American requirements, which necessitate the use of U.S. steel for all federally funded construction projects. And I have no objection at all to using U.S. products. I'm more familiar with the U.S. steel industry than most people, because when I was at the International Trade Commission, I had the opportunity to visit somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 steel mills, and we have excellent steel technology and steel production in this country, and so it's a good industry. I'm not speaking about it, but as an industry, they tend to like less competition rather than more, and so if they could persuade government to not allow products from other countries to be used in federal projects, that's great from their perspective. The rule of thumb we used to use was that about the price of steel for federal construction was about 30% higher than for the private economy in the United States. And it can go higher than that, but that's a lot of extra money for taxpayers to pay for federal construction. So we're not seeing at this point any lessening of the by the Biden administration of this tendency to try to use industrial policy, or like you say, government picking winners and losers, from backing away from the support of those policies to try to help old line industries. And if it was just a matter of helping an industry, you can think, well, that's honorable and noble to do, but you've got to look at the consequences. The issue here is that the U.S. steel mill business is actually not all that large. It employs 144,000 people, and it accounts for 0.15% of U.S. GDP, $31 billion. Okay, you look then instead at the steel consuming part of the economy, which is much larger. You've got 6.7 million workers who take steel and make something useful out of it, and they account for about 5.8% of GDP. So we're hurting the bigger part of the economy to try to help the smaller part.
Dan, we got to take a quick break. We're together with Dan Pearson, a trade policy fellow at Americans for Prosperity. Still a lot more to talk about trade. Trade means jobs. Trade is very important to all of us, just how we live our lives and the quality of life we have, but also for what we make and the career opportunities that we have. Don't miss it. We're going to be back here in a second with Dan Pearson.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're together with Dan Pearson from the Americans for Prosperity. Hey, Dan, look, free trade and the sort of trade policies that you advocate for, both of the political parties are not on your side right now. Republicans, have really courted the blue-collar workers, bringing American jobs back. That was, Trump front and center, a very big departure from traditional Republican policy on trade. And Democrats talked a big game about trade, but they never did anything. At least Trump said what he was going to do, and, unlike many politicians, he really meant it. He went out and he did it. Whereas the Democrats...
Very rare.
Obama, I'm going to get rid of NAFTA. We're going to get rid of NAFTA. NAFTA's no good. And then after he's elected, then, of course, he changes his tune. And then he became a free trader and was promoting American trade agreements. A huge turnaround there. Has Biden been boxed in here? Because his constituents, Democrats were supposed to be supporting American workers, union workers, the people that were promoting protectionist policies that you just mentioned that are not good for the American economy. And I believe you. I believe they are not good for the American policy. Over 50% of what we import from China goes into American products, are needed by American manufacturers to make things and to employ people. We need to have access to the global markets for stuff that we need to go into our products, as well as export markets for those things that we make and that we do very well at. And we do very well at many, many things that America can export if it has access to foreign markets like foreign manufacturers have to our market. That's true because I'm an American exporter, and I know that. We have nothing to fear about by having open and transparent markets. Americans can do wonderful things if the shackles are taken off and if we're allowed to compete. Problem is we haven't been allowed to compete, and that's why we have these trade deficits. But right now, what you advocate for, the Republicans aren't talking about that sort of world that you envision. The Democrats are not talking about that world that you envision. So what happens? We have no political party right now that is going to help us with our advocacy for the vision that we have for our country, which is prosperity and jobs and good paying jobs. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that those of us who are happy to call ourselves free traders kind of on our own right now. We are
we're out in the desert.
Look, sometimes these tides flow in one direction for quite a while before they shift. The tide has been flowing in the direction of protectionism now for a number of years. I do believe it'll shift and flow the other way because the underlying economics of protectionism are so damaging to America, and the benefits are so great. And, we've been talking mostly about the economic benefits, but don't forget about the underlying issue of economic freedom, individual liberty. We have government now telling people and businesses, you really can't import that product, or you can only import it at a very high price. And you have government making choices for people that they should be able to make for themselves. I find that very troubling also.
Yeah, but Rich, the mood in America has shifted on this, right? Because of China. China's stealing our jobs. China's doing this. China's doing that. They got this huge trade surplus with the United States. All our jobs are going to China, and then coronavirus and all of that, sort of thing. I just don't think there's an appetite right now in the American public to change course on trade, and I don't see how Biden can remove the tariffs on China. I mean, he's totally boxed in. If he does, he's weak on China, and that's not a very popular sentiment right now.
Well, but to be honest, if there's a way to get out of this that helps China and makes China look better than it could, the Biden administration is going to do that. And that's just a simple fact. That's the way it's going to be. But I think one of the things that I'm listening to you guys talk, and two words come to mind that I like a lot, and that's free market. I believe the free market can really dictate where you want to go and where companies are going to do things and how we're going to create good policy. And one of the things that Dan talks about in this piece, which is really good, is that to have a good industrial policy, not a misguided one, but a good one. A good approach would be, and I'm going to quote him, maintaining a favorable business climate based on, and this is important, these are the important words, economic freedom, entrepreneurship, open and competitive markets, there you go, and the rule of law. And I think if you have that, if you create an even playing field, the market will dictate. Dan, don't you think that's what really should happen? The market should dictate, and we should create a competitive environment for all, and it will go where it needs to go. I mean, that to me is a natural order of things.
I agree completely, Rich. We need as a country to have more faith in the approach and the policies that have made us great in the first place, where there was a lot of individual opportunity and an ability to make choices and to try to better oneself that has led to this huge buildup over time of wealth that makes us the most prosperous country in the world.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I believe that, it's going to be a while before we get back to that. And, there's going to have to be almost a brand new political movement that is out there advocating that. And, I think, Trump has set America on a different course, at least the Republican Party on a different course. And I don't see the Democrats coming around to that either. So, Dan, I wish you were right. I wish we could get to that, and I'm just not very optimistic that we will. I think tariffs are going to be here for a while. I hope I'm wrong. Dan Pearson, Trade Policy Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. Dan, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation, Neil.
Thank you. Coming up, we have Lindsay Bealor Greenleaf. She is a health policy expert and also vice president at ADVI. Stay with us. We're going to talk about the the COVID vaccines, and should this intellectual property be available to anybody and everybody to get it rolled out quicker.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, there was a headline this week about President Biden lifting patent protection for COVID vaccines. It's a really important conversation to have. I mean, on one side, you have the protection of intellectual property. And hasn't that been like a really source of friction between America and its trade partners, specifically China, but not just China? I mean, American intellectual property just gets ripped off with impunity, and we see that happening over and over and over again.
Yeah, the second business is Latin America. I mean, we covered that many, many times in my magazine.
Well, and China, I mean, my company, myself, I own a lot of intellectual property, and I'm constantly battling in China. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, just blatant stuff going on. And what does that cost the American economy? I mean, billions and billions of dollars. I'm sure over a course of 4 or 5 years, trillions of dollars. It's very big, and so many jobs are at stake. On the other hand, you want to be a good global citizen, and you want to help people of the world. And there are people who just simply can't afford it, don't have the R&D infrastructure, and they're never going to get there. And people's lives are in jeopardy. So I understand that argument as well. So let's bring on someone here to help us with the discussion. We're very pleased to have with us Lindsay Bealor Greenleaf. She's a healthcare expert, and she's vice president at ADVI Health, which is a health policy consulting group. Lindsay, welcome to Made in America.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, I mean, this is a tough question. I could see how morally that this plays out, but then I can also see, all of the investment that it went into these vaccines, that people have to monetize those investments, and intellectual property is a very, very serious issue. Those who invent and spend the money should get the benefit of all that work and investment in that effort. So where do you come down on this? I mean, how should we think of this?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that it's patent protections that drove manufacturers to take on the huge investment and the huge risk that was required to create the COVID vaccines that we have today that are going to help us in this pandemic. So this is a historic announcement to have the White House in support of the waiving of these patent protections as it pertains to a World Trade Organization agreement like this. A very notable policy shift there. Historically, the U.S. is the global leader when it comes to patent protections, and that's how we've been able to attract the best and the brightest and be the leader on the innovation front. So a really, really disturbing shift there that will have, could have wide sweeping effects on future innovation and willingness to invest in new cures like this.
Well, this is Dr. Rich. I totally agree with what you're saying. See, I think this is a very, very bad decision. And I'll tell you why. This is not a simple thing to do. So I see the moral of the whole thing. You have to look at the world and help the world. 100%. America's been doing that since Americans been doing that. Mm-hmm. But this is not like, Neil, and you make these wonderful products that people can buy in stores all over the world, and 15 or so different companies manufacturing companies you own. It's one thing. But when you're dealing with the nuances of the creation of a vaccine that required incredible intelligence, incredible R&D, incredible machinery, having the right facilities, and so forth and so on, to create these products, which, not coincidentally, was paid for by the American taxpayer, since we gave a deposit on all of this to make sure it happened and to speed it up. So there were two things that concerned me. One, I don't think you can just say, and this isn't like Young Frankenstein, where you find the book that says how I did it. It's not going to work. That's not going to happen. You have to have very, very specialized people, very, very specialized real estate to make this happen. And that's not going to happen overnight. So even if we gave them, here, go and create, which would scare the hell out of me, by the way. I wouldn't want to take that vaccine that they would create because they've never done it. They're not going to be ready to create it for quite a while because they've got to get up to speed. So I don't buy into that. I just don't buy into that. And the moral side of that is I wouldn't want to give that to somebody who doesn't want to create it because there are already fake vaccines out there. That's occurring right now in the world. So if you give the formula to somebody who doesn't know what to do with it 100%, the way the guys and women do over at Pfizer, for example, you're setting yourself up for a big, big problem. Now, here's the flip side, and then I want to get back to Lindsay. The flip side is there is a way, if we look at it differently, that Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and so forth can get out there and ramp up what they're doing. We could help them do that with good planning and intelligence behind it, and not the emotionality of, well, we'll just give it to them, and that's the best thing to do because, it's the right thing to do for everybody. You're going to wind up killing people doing that anyhow. And by the way, since you won't have it in time for this year when the people are dying in the streets, which I saw on news this past weekend, they're dying in the street. Is this going to help the people right now? They need it now. They need it in the next few months. It's not going to happen. So, Lindsay, am I making sense here, or am I just, up against the wall?
No, absolutely. I'm nodding. You can't see me, but I am. If you pretend for a minute that you don't care about patent protection, if we can live in a hypothetical world where that just doesn't matter, the other problem with this announcement is that it's just not going to work. The problems with global access to vaccines cannot be solved with a patent seizure. You have really complex supply chains going on here. You have really complex manufacturing. There's only a few facilities in the world that are equipped to take all the necessary steps needed to create some of these vaccines. So this is a problem that is really complicated, and the Biden administration is trying to take a really big approach here, but they're oversimplifying the problem, and it's going to have some really horrible implications for innovation in the long run.
So, we got about 30 seconds, and then we'll pick it up again on the other side of the break. What does Biden do? Does he just say, "Okay, Pfizer, just make it public, all of your trade secrets, all of your patents, everything that you've got here, just put it out there on the internet"? I mean, help me with this. I mean, what does it mean that they're going to rescind patent protection on these vaccines?
Yeah, there's a lot that remains to be figured out, but at the moment, the U.S. has signaled support for the waiver of an agreement at the World Trade Organization level that has patent protections at the heart of it. There are still steps that have to be taken at the World Trade Organization level before any of this actually happens, and we still would need to see the actual text of this waiver to know exactly how far this goes in terms of, how compulsory in nature this is, what exactly it is that they're demanding of the manufacturer. So there's a lot of details that we just don't know yet. But from a symbolic level, this is just a huge announcement.
Now, Lindsay, we're going to take a quick break. We're with Lindsay Bealor Greenleaf. She's vice president, an health policy expert at ADVI Health, and talking about the COVID vaccine, what we should be doing with it, how do we roll it out to the world, what is the right thing to do. Lots of interests here. Stay with us together with Dr. Rich, and I and Lindsay will be right back.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with health expert and vice president at ADVI Health, Lindsay Bealor Greenleaf. So, intellectual property, the pharmaceuticals, has anything like this been done before where the United States has forced its companies to hand over, its intellectual property, to say India or Brazil or other countries that were going through? I don't know if there's ever been anything similar to this, But is there any precedent to this? As like one of the things that Rich and I have done a lot of shows on is healthcare, and we did a lot of shows on healthcare during the time of Obamacare and throughout Obamacare and so forth. Mm-hmm. And America is the R&D for the worldwide pharmaceutical market, and it's Americans paying exceptionally high prices for pharmaceuticals that are sold around the world, for pennies on the dollar from what Americans have to pay and what our healthcare insurance policies have to pay, which drives up the cost of healthcare. So it seems to be like we have a broke system to begin with, right? I mean, Americans are underwriting all of this technology. We're paying for it. In this case, okay, the COVID vaccine has been free. You go in and get it. They're not going to charge you for it. But so many other medicines, breakthrough medicines in America, are just so out of touch and out of reach for so many of our citizens, because the pharmaceutical companies, make all their money back in America, and then all of that technology is given to the world essentially for nothing. Am I wrong? Did I get something wrong there?
In the drug pricing context, with how this plays out abroad versus in the U.S., one key distinction is Americans have access to new innovative treatments years prior to our other counterparts abroad, other developed nations. The one stat that comes to mind is with cancer drugs specifically, compared to other developed countries, the U.S.
But Lindsay, doesn't a lot of Americans go overseas to get some of these cancer treatments because they can't get them in the U.S.? I know friends of mine have gone to Mexico and places like that because they can't get treatments in the U.S. because it's just FDA. I guess the FDA hasn't approved it, or whoever approves it hasn't approved it. It has
to go through the approval process,
and
which could take years.
It could take decades.
Yeah.
So from an approval standpoint, the FDA is known as the gold standard, and I understand that criticism of things might take longer here than in other countries. There are avenues, though, for patients to take for drugs that are not yet approved. There's compassionate use. There's some things called the expanded access programs. Some wonky terms I could throw around here. That the FDA has some avenues. Manufacturers have some avenues to give you access to drugs before approval, and these programs are relatively new. So that topic that you bring up is a good one, and some progress has been made there.
I have to bring something up. It's not quite a segue, but it's tied into this.
Yeah.
And I want to start connecting some of the dots, particularly as it relates to the Biden administration. So let's say they give out the intellectual property rights. They coerce the companies to do that, which, by the way, if I own stock in it, I would bring lawsuit against the federal government on that, because I think I have standing. If I own stock in Pfizer and Pfizer is forced to give something away, I would expect the stockholders to say, this isn't going to happen. We're not doing that. This is why we invest in this company. We understand health and sickness, but Pfizer's in the business to make money because people have to get better. But who in the world, Lindsay, who can create the vaccines right now? If we did that tomorrow, I'm trying to think. Not a lot of people, so probably Russia, they can do it. Forget Iran. I don't think I want their vaccine. Russia and China. Russia, China. So by doing this, who are we really helping in terms of the intellectual property rights, and who benefits by it to a degree? It's going to be China and Russia, because they're capable right now. They have the facilities. Don't count the Wuhan lab. They didn't do very well. But you see what I'm saying? That worries me. It gives an edge. It gives something to people who don't wish us well. And I don't like that. So if I was a stockholder of one of these companies, which I probably am in some way with the funds that I got, I probably don't even know it right now, I would hope that we would take lawsuit, if that happens, against the Biden administration and seek damages. Because that's why we invest in these companies. That's the whole basis for capitalism. You know what I mean? Lindsay, what do you think?
Absolutely. No, it helps Russia and China and foreign counterparts abroad in the short term when it comes to the COVID vaccine specifically, but it also has broader industry-wide implications and longer-term implications when foreign investors are looking at where they want to put their money. The U.S. might not look as favorable as it did before, because we, have taken the president has taken this stance where patent protections are just not as important to him as they have been historically here. So it's a big problem long term.
So what happens, though, if Pfizer and Moderna has to give over their intellectual property? What happens? I mean, can they go back to the Biden administration? We got about 10 seconds. Can they go back to the Biden administration and say, no, or this is what it's going to cost you?
These conversations are happening as we speak. The announcement yesterday, as disturbing as it was, and it is, it's not the end of the story. We still have hope that for this waiver to become effective with the WTO, it has to have unanimous consent among its members. So there's hopes that other countries will stand up and oppose this. In fact, right before I came on, Germany has come out criticizing the U.S. for their stance on this. So we've seen some opposition. We'll see where these countries actually vote, though, coming up here pretty soon.
Thank you, Lindsay. Lindsay Bealor Greenleaf, health expert and vice president at ADVI Health. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I will have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, very, very important topic on intellectual property and just, how that is supposed to work. And if you're going to make an investment, then having the government come, right behind you and say, now, once you've done that, now we're just going to make it available to anybody. And I think you made a great point. If this intellectual property is released and everybody has access to it, I mean, who's going to benefit? It's going to be America's competitors. So I could see why Germany, as Lindsay was saying, would be upset about that, because they were a very big partner to Pfizer.
That's right.
And it was a joint project between the U.S. and Germany to get that done. So, Germany's got a lot of eggs in this basket as well.
Well, that's exactly what my 30-year-old son said. He was about to get the Moderna shot. And then he called me, a couple of days later, and he said, hey, listen, I switched. I went, what do you mean you switched? He said, I got the Pfizer. I said, why is that? He said, I want German technology in me. That was his reason. So I thought that was kind of cool. But it's very upsetting to me. I don't think you just flip the whole country and say, we're going to turn this switch and you have to give up everything. The reason you're in business is for this. That's the right reason that these companies are in business. They're in business because it is moral to work hard to produce therapeutics that can save the world. That's why they exist, and that's why they make a lot of money. That's why the CEO fights hard to get things done. So to say that we're going to just give it away, particularly those who would benefit the most or those who don't want us to benefit the most, would be China and Russia. I think it's a very foolish idea. Yeah, a better idea would be that we find a way, and this is what I'm hearing from the chairman and the CEOs and the presidents of Pfizer and Moderna, because they've been all over the cable channels this week. They're saying there are ways that we can work and we can ramp up and we can do, because they know how to do that. They can do other things to bring on more online. And particularly as more
production.
Yeah, they can do that. That can be done because they know how to do it. They have the people to do it. There's no, learning curve, so to speak. There's no, a long runway to get something up and running. So I think this is a horrible mistake that this administration could make in terms of intellectual property rights. And the question then becomes, Neil, because as you said yourself, everything's a precedent. If we do this, we set a precedent. This could be used for the next thing that comes along. That, well, listen, for the greater good, we want you to give up everything that you just invested and had, 1,200 people working on, all PhDs and doctors and MDs and all these things that have to get done with these incredibly talented, smart, high-paying, expensive people. Forget that. It's for the greater good. I don't like that. I don't like that.
Just to caution, is that a lot of this stuff that we're hearing coming out of the Biden administration are really aspirational. I mean, they're just, there's a lot that has to happen. I mean, Biden's tax policy, I mean, it's very aspirational. I mean, he's not going to get it. We heard from Grover Norquist last week. There's a lot of Democrats that's going to be opposed, not only to the tax brackets that he's looking to extend, but also the capital gains tax. There's a lot of Democrats who have 401ks. And so, they're going to be hurt just as much as Republicans are. So I doubt that he's going to get the votes on that. When it comes to his infrastructure proposals, when it comes to his American Family Act or whatever he's calling that, when you talk about his getting rid of the right to work states and making the right to work laws in 27 states now, and going and overriding those in favor of unionism. I mean, this is all aspirational stuff. I mean, so much of this is just a pipe dream. It's just a pipe dream. It's not going to get passed. He doesn't have the votes for it, but it does unsettle things. It unsettles things just because it's being talked about and it's being mentioned. Hey, look, Bernie Sanders was out there, proposing some pretty radical stuff. And right now that radical stuff that Bernie was talking about has been adopted by the Democrat Party.
Exactly.
By a large measure.
That's pretty scary.
I don't like any of it. If it becomes part of the national dialogue, you'd never know where it will go.
Well, yeah, and again, it's precedent. One of the things you said is right. The Biden administration, and particularly Joe Biden, likes to speak in generalities, greatness, and he was trying to listen. He sees himself as the 21st century FDR. He does. Make the world, what did FDR come up with? Churchill, Lend-Lease program, ways to find things that we can do to help England, which was a great idea. That actually worked. That made sense for everybody. But this doesn't. And we didn't give up our intellectual rights to anything when we were giving Liberty ships and we were giving tanks and all sorts of things over to the UK in World War II back in the early 40s. So it's very troubling to have the government say that you need to give something up for the greater good just because you should give it up for the greater good and not try to find a way to make it work so it's a win-win for the corporations and we save and help the world. America is the best. We are the best at saving folks. There's no question about it. We saved the world on two fronts in World War II. We saved us from the Japanese in World War II and the situation there. And we also, at the same time, we fought off the Nazis and saved the world, to be free the best we can. And we won. And so we have a great history of doing that. We do that. And I think we can do this, too. You just got to let, again, getting back to our earlier conversation, the free market, the industries can do it if you challenge them to do it, rather than tell them to do it in a strong-arm, central planning way. Scary stuff. I don't like it. I don't think the American people would like it either.
Well, Rich, you got the last word, because unfortunately we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.